is there a delay before nystagmus starts in patients who have BPPV, particularly canalithiasis? What's up everyone? My name is Austin Miller, I'm the NeuroNerd PT, and today we're going to break down the pathophysiology of BPPV, particularly the differences between the latency of nystagmus with cupulolithiasis and canalithiasis. Unofficial sponsor of today's video is Samuel Adams Old Fezziwig Rich in Spice, an ale brewed with cinnamon, ginger, and orange peel, found at a Walmart near you in their winter variety pack. So let's talk quickly about what is going on in cupulolithiasis versus canalithiasis that causes an immediate onset of nystagmus with positional testing with cupulolithiasis that doesn't happen with canalithiasis. So in cupulolithiasis, what we know is that we've got a piece of debris that is attached or adhered to the cupula itself. Now, let's just imagine this is your posterior canal, and this is the ampulla and the cupula of the posterior canal, okay? So when you're upright, gravity is pushing down in this direction, and that debris doesn't have any impact on the deflection of your cupula. Now, when you lie back with your head turned toward the affected side, what happens is this whole posterior canal turns and is now in a dependent position. So gravity is pulling the cupula down this way. Now normally, the cupula has the exact same density as all of the endolymph in the ampulla and in the canal. However, the otoconia, or the mass of otoconia that is adhered to the cupula, it has 3 times greater density than the cupula and the endolymph. So as soon as you lay back, gravity starts to really pull down on that otoconia mass, and it causes the cupula to deflect in the plane of gravity. And so that's why you get an immediate onset of nystagmus, because you get an immediate deflection of the cupula. So in cupulolithiasis, there's no delay before the nystagmus starts because you have an immediate response due to the deflection of the cupula as a result of that otoconia mass weighing down the cupula and causing it to deflect within the plane of gravity. So with canalithiasis, we know that latency is usually about 5 to 10 seconds, and that nystagmus tends to last less than 30 seconds, but with cupulolithiasis, it usually lasts longer than a minute because there's constant deflection happening and it doesn't let go because there's always something weighing the cupula down. It really is just a matter of waiting on the nystagmus to fatigue, but in canalithiasis, we know that it's going to last less than 30 seconds with about a 5 to 10 second latency before the nystagmus starts. Let's talk about what the theories around that are. In 2004, Squires et al. Published an article in the Journal of Biomechanics called A Mathematical Model for Top-Shelf Vertigo, the Role of Sedimenting Otoconia in BPPV. And what they were trying to look for is why is there so much variability in the latency and the duration of nystagmus in canalithiasis, and they were setting out to develop or postulate a visual model of why we see so much variability in posterior canalithiasis. So what Squires et al. Theorized is that the latency and the duration of the nystagmus is completely dependent on where the otoconia mass begins before you do your positional testing. So this image is a very rough sketch of one of the images that they published in that article. And so you've got 3 separate masses within the ampulla of the posterior canal, and we're going to talk through the behavior of each one as postulated by Squires et al. So one big thing that Squires et al. Talks about is that pressure is what causes deflection of the cupula, but we have to wonder, if we've got otoconia falling through the ampulla, why isn't there immediate pressure causing deflection of the cupula? And this is what Squire et al. Theorized. Because you have such a large volume of area and endolymph within the ampulla compared to the semicircular canal, what they're suggesting is, and we know that pressure and volume have an inverse relationship where if volume is large, then pressure is going to be decreased, right? And so what they said, or what they suggested, was because you have such a large volume relative to the semicircular canal, pressure is going to be relatively low, which is going to be not large enough to cause deflection of the cupula. And so as you get closer to the semicircular canal, volume is going to decrease and thus pressure is going to increase, so much so that we get deflection of the cupula. So think of this like a bathtub. If you've got a big tub full of water, right, and you've got the drain right here, you get the little tornado effect. You don't see much happening in terms of water rushing in this large area of volume, but when you look close at the drain, you see a lot of movement or a lot of pressure pulling water down. And that's because we're going from a large volume where pressure is relatively low to a very small volume of space that's causing a lot of pressure. And so in the same way, what they suggested was when the otoconia is falling down toward where gravity is pulling it, when it's in this large ampullated ending, you're not getting any nystagmus because deflection of the cupula is not happening. Another thing they talked about is anytime otoconia is in contact with the walls of the ampulla and the semicircular canals, you're not getting much or any pressure that's deflecting the cupula. And so as long as otoconia are in contact with the walls, you're not going to get deflection of the cupula, and thus you're not going to get any nystagmus. So sediment A is going to fall down in the plane of gravity all the way down toward the narrowing of the semicircular canal from the ampulla, and it's going to fall down until it hits the wall, right? So really you only have this portion where it's actually causing enough pressure to deflect the cupula, right? So relatively small amount of time, but great amount of latency that you're going to see before nystagmus starts, and then that nystagmus is going to be very short-lived. Now with sediment B, what you're going to get is it's going to fall all the way down, and then it's actually going to fall further in the canal before it hits the wall and rides it all the way down. So from here you're going to get, for B, a much longer duration of nystagmus and perhaps a large amount of latency before the nystagmus starts. Now with sediment C, you're going to have this fall all along the wall, and then really it's just going to ride the wall all the way down. So what Squires et al. Postulated is that if your sediment is starting in the position similar to where C is, you might not get any nystagmus response, but still have posterior canalithiasis. And so based on that, we should be very, very aware of the need for multiple sets of tests. So don't just test Dix-Hallpike once, test it multiple times to see if you get that sediment moving, if then you get a positive response. But essentially, based on where the sediment is, it's going to take a certain amount of time before it can reach the opening of the canal and cause enough pressure to deflect the cupula, and that's what causes the latency and the variability of the duration of nystagmus is based on how far does it have to fall before it hits the canal wall. And so if you guys have any questions about BPPV in particular, or canalithiasis versus cupulolithiasis, just let me know and I'd be happy to do some more research or answer any questions you have. Thanks, guys.